will be a series of seminars and knowledge sharing events on the topic of urban heat in South Asia. I think we're just beginning to realize, and I think the policymakers are also just beginning to realize the enormity of the threat that the urban heat poses to South Asia. So just to give you one statistic, there's a study that was done by MIT a few years ago, and they found that even in the lowest emission scenario, the number of heat waves in South Asia is going to triple. And this has like enormous ramifications for public policy. And unfortunately, it is going to disproportionately affect the poor and the vulnerable. So just to give you one example, most poor people work out in outside, in physical labor. And that will no longer be possible in many parts of South Asia in the peak of summer. There was, I'm forgetting the exact name of the place in Pakistan, but last year the temperature hit something like 54 degrees centigrade. And it's not just Pakistan, there are parts of India, like for example, in Rajasthan, in Gujarat, it's the same. That's number one. But second is that I think even the way we approach, for example, urban design needs to be rethought. I was just mentioning to a few people that I was in Kerala a few weeks ago, and it wasn't very hot outside. It was actually quite pleasant. But when we were sitting inside a government building, it felt like an oven because there was galvanized sheets on the top, and people are not realizing that we need to rethink our romance with brick and mortar and steel and cement. No, we need to think about the value of green spaces. In the US, there are very good studies which show that poorer neighborhoods, the average temperature is 5 to 6 degrees higher than the richer neighborhood, because the richer neighborhoods are typically greener. So these are the kind of policy issues that we are going to have to confront in the years to come. So I'm really thankful to the team and to Ella and Monica for putting together this fantastic panel. And the way we'll do it is that we will start with Ella. So Ella Kim is our senior DRM specialist, and she led the work on a policy brief that we produced a few months ago on urban heat. So Ella will take about 5 minutes to lay that out, sort of the main findings. And then we will turn to our speakers, whom I'll introduce one by one when we come to them. So Ella, over to you.
Thanks, Abbas. Wait a minute for my presentation to load. Okay. So as Abbas mentioned, the World Bank released a policy brief on urban heat in South Asia recently, with the goal of fostering deeper conversations across the region about improving cities' resilience to extreme heat. As we all know, South Asia is increasingly vulnerable to rising temperatures and extreme heat events. Heat is also increasingly an urban problem, with the urban heat island effect amplifying the impacts of rising temperatures from climate change. Trees and vegetation are being replaced with asphalt and concrete, and with more waste heat from cars, factories, and air conditioners. Urban areas in South Asia are now up to 20 degrees Celsius warmer than suburban and rural areas. Large thermal inequities exist within cities, with low-income and vulnerable populations bearing the brunt of these effects. Here are some key takeaways from the brief to set the context for today's session. The policy brief examines heat in South Asian cities through 3 different layers of the urban environment: buildings, communities, and cities. It also highlights 3 vulnerable population groups that are particularly relevant for the region: children, informal workers, and residents of informal settlements. The concept of a heat-resilient shahar or city is introduced, emphasizing the importance of green and blue spaces and permeable surfaces in reducing urban heat. These solutions can serve multiple objectives, also including flood protection, reduced carbon emissions, increased biodiversity, and improved air, soil, and water quality. The policy brief identifies 3 recommendations to enhance urban heat resilience in South Asia. First, cities need more systematic data collection and analysis to adequately identify, manage, and monitor South Asia's urban heat risks. We need both indoor and outdoor heat measurements from different areas of a given city to understand the actual temperatures experienced by people, and to identify heat-vulnerable environments and populations within each city. Second, integrating people and place in future heat management efforts will involve addressing both spatial and social vulnerabilities. This means not only considering physical heat risk factors, such as building density and access to green and blue spaces, but also factoring in demographic and socioeconomic determinants, such as income, age, education, gender, health, and social isolation when designing and implementing urban heat interventions. Finally, policymakers should develop processes that address the longer-term impacts of heat, in addition to its acute immediate impacts, such as increased mortality and morbidity. At the city level, this will involve embedding urban heat resilience in building codes, zoning, and land use regulations, with a focus on heat-resilient, affordable housing, schools, public buildings, and transit infrastructure. The policy brief ends with a conceptual framework to guide policymakers in enhancing urban heat resilience in South Asia. The framework has 3 overarching priorities. 1, better understanding heat risks. 2, securing the necessary human, technical, and financial resources. And 3, embedding urban heat resilience into infrastructure planning and development processes to ultimately ensure that our cities can prepare for both a more urban and warmer future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ella, for that very short and precise presentation. So I'm going to turn to the first of our speakers, and that is Dr. Nausheen Anwar. Dr. Anwar is a professor of city and regional planning at the Institute of Business Administration in Karachi. And she's also the founder of the fantastic Karachi Urban Lab. So I'm really a big admirer of the work that you do. And I think I remember, I think it was the Pakistan experience where you came on the podcast to talk about, urban life and sort of, slum upgrading in Karachi. But I noticed that you are also doing very interesting work on heat. And at your website, it mentions the concept of heat in an off-grid city, which I really like, that concept. And it brings in all the nuances of, gender and inequality in cities. So, Dr. Anwar, over to you.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, and we can see your slides.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to first of all thank Abbas, you and Ella and the World Bank Group in general for inviting me to participate in this conversation today, in this forum. And hello to all the other esteemed participants from other parts of South Asia as well. I very much look forward to their presentations. So I have 10 minutes to speak, and I'm going to be squeezing in a lot. So forgive me if it sounds as if I'm speeding through some of these slides, but if there are specific slides that catch your attention, we can always refer to them again in the course of the Q&A and the conversations that we will have after everyone has presented. So next slide, please. So Pakistan is considered as the 8th most vulnerable country in the world vis-a-vis climate change impacts. And within the last 2 decades, it has experienced over 152 adverse climate events comprising floods, storms, heat waves, and droughts. And certain studies project that average temperatures will increase anywhere between 2.5 to 2.8 Celsius by the 2050s. But what is of significance today is the increased frequency of days with intense heat, a 5-fold increase in heat wave days per annum that Pakistan is generally experiencing now. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? So just to give you a very brief example, and Abbas, the city that you were referring to is called Jacobabad, and it was in fact in April of 2022 when the ambient temperature exceeded the usual average threshold, which hovers around 51 or so, and it exceeded 52 Celsius. That's ambient. So we're not talking the WBGT, or what is called the wet bulb globe temperature, which is globally speaking, a more accurate way of measuring the stress of heat, because that also includes humidity. So in Pakistan, from March to April 2022, we witnessed 2 months of back-to-back heat waves. This was generally across South Asia. So I've included India in that map also. So we had 5 heat wave advisories from the Pakistan Meteorological Department over a course of 60 days. And apparently this was considered the longest heat wave since 1901. Next slide, please. Now, in reimagining the context of heat in Karachi, which has a population of about 20 million, according to the latest census, and is considered Pakistan's largest metropolis, but demography and size aside, 2015 was a particularly hot year for Pakistan, and Karachi specifically, and the broader province of Sindh experienced very high temperatures. Although these temperatures were not necessarily that unusual, if we go back historically speaking, May and June 1938 temperatures were hovered around 47.8 Celsius. But in June 2015, Karachi experienced a week-long heat wave, which claimed an officially recorded 1,181 lives as temperatures rose to 45 Celsius, with a corresponding heat index value of 66 Celsius. And this was, by every measure, an extreme event, but it also happened to have coincided with the month of Ramadan, with severe electricity and water shortages and very high humidity. So even if we take Ramadan out of the picture, these are recurrent, persistent issues of high humidity, and especially infrastructural challenges. So it was at this point in time in 2015 then, and following that heat waves were reimagined as an extremity in Pakistan, and especially in Karachi, and as an exception by the media, by state officials, and the medical community. And this led to the Karachi Heatwave Management Plan, which, by the way, is a kind of a carbon copy of the Ahmedabad Heatwave Management Plan, and they're kind of mirrors of each other. And what is interesting is that the death toll following that heat wave remains very controversial. Mortality estimates vary anywhere from 1,181 to 3,000 plus, depending upon who you talk to, because what we don't have in the context of cities like Karachi is a coroner, medical coroner employed by the public sector, which can then, as bodies move in, as these deaths occur, there is a way of tracking, although even then, heat wave related deaths are very difficult to track, chronic heat even more so. So official records then offer us a very limited scope for understanding the material and environmental context in which people died, factors regarding the natural and built environments that may have exacerbated the effects of high temperatures during the heat wave. For instance, neighborhood densities, house construction, materials, infrastructure access, workplace conditions, and so forth. So this brings me to a very important question that my colleagues and I have been grappling with, that to what extent has Karachi's weather changed? So next slide, please. So, my colleagues from the Karachi Urban Lab and another colleague who's an environmental scientist and very, very good with data, with crunching data, we decided to take about 60 years of data from the meteorological department based on 2 data points in Karachi, which is also a challenge really, because in order to understand what getting hotter means, one of the things that we need are proper data points to be able to take historical data into account. And while there is a considerable amount of information in the literature that says that it's getting hotter, there is lack of clarity on the specific changes in climate in cities like Karachi, which cities such as Karachi have already undergone and are projected to experience in the future. And this is again partly attributed to the lack of climate data gathering points and limited access to these data points. So we were very fortunate where we had been funded by the United Kingdom Research and Innovation, UKRI, with a very large grant. Bas, that was the project that you were referring to. And we had money to buy the data from the Pakistan Meteorological Department. This data is not available otherwise. And we used this data, we took data 1960 to 2022 to do a time series analysis. Next slide, please. And the full information on this time series analysis is available in a report, which is found on the project webpage of Cool Infrastructure's Life with heat on the off-grid city. And I think it's available on our website of the Karachi Urban Lab, but I'm not entirely sure. So just very quickly, what we found on the basis of the time series analysis is that Karachi's nighttime temperatures have increased by 2.4 Celsius, while daytime temperatures by 1.6 Celsius. And relative to the global average increase in temperature of 1.1 Celsius since 1900, the rate of warming in Karachi is especially high. The summer season has also shifted earlier, with daytime ambient temperatures averaging over 35 Celsius in April. And what we are seeing is that the summer season is lasting longer. And these findings very much resonate with studies that have predicted changing climatic trends in the coastal hubs of South Asia, as well as the onset of temperature extremes in Pakistan. However, despite such noticeable shifts in the climate patterns of a city like Karachi, which we can take as a proxy to be able to kind of unpack these sorts of issues, there is a clear gap in consolidating temperature data and integrating it with urban indicators, which I think is crucially important to build a nuanced understanding of the implications for urban environments in relation to inequality and vulnerability. Next slide, please. So when we place the importance of this data and tying it with urban indicators in the context of an unequal city, there are several kinds of dynamics that we see, right? Vast disparities in income and distribution of urban resources in a city like Karachi, which is, I think, akin to many cities across the global urban south. Over 62% of the city's population lives on a little more than 9% of its total built-up area. And these are the areas that are the most vulnerable to extreme heat events. This is where you have people living with precarious incomes, and then again, serious shortages of water and highly uneven access to electricity and even ventilation. And these are also spaces that are increasingly seeing the onslaught of the disappearance of green spaces. Where we do find green spaces more are those that are oriented towards wealthier parts of the city, where land prices are generally higher. So then greening is also locked into an unequal geography of class, power, and infrastructural inequalities. Next slide, please. So when we kind of home in on this whole issue of informal or low-income spaces, we sort of find a multitude of different kinds of challenges in a city like Karachi, some of which are also related to the relationship between mental health and heat and nutrition. There is a nexus here, but it's a big gap, as is the gap between mental health and heat. There are these very important relationships between these different kinds of variables that haven't even been explored yet or been thought about. And all of this in turn then dovetails with challenges of housing and tenure, water, sanitation, access to healthcare, environmental challenges, and so forth. Next slide, please. So how do people live with heat? So in the context of the project that we've been a part of for the last 3 years, which has dovetailed now into multiple other projects on heat, not only across Karachi, but actually I'm taking up now a very important 3-year project with a colleague based at King's College London, who's a climate scientist, and we're going to be looking at the city of Jacobabad. So what my colleagues and I at the Karachi Urban Lab have been doing is looking at very place-specific, community-based practices and risk mitigation strategies related to what it means to live with heat. And we've deployed multiple methods using spatial data, weather data, qualitative, quantitative. We've generated thermal diaries. We've involved focus group discussions, and all of this has a very strong gender component. Next slide, please. And through this, we've generated quite a bit of data. This is to give you just a very quick idea of the kinds of tools that we've used in terms of measuring heat, understanding heat, using weather data also. Next slide, please. And we bought all this equipment as part of this extensive project that we were part of. And one of the things that this equipment has helped us to understand is that the threat is not only in terms of the heat that exists outdoors, and this is not just in relation to heat waves, but also in relation to chronic heat, which is something that is far more persistent. But it is also the threat of the heat indoors, especially when you're looking at residents living in specific kinds of environments, specific kinds of built environments, with specific kinds of bricks and mortar or lack thereof in use. Next slide, please. So in 2020, we also conducted, as a part of that project that Abbas mentioned, a geopulse survey. We couldn't actually go out into the field because this was the height of COVID. And the findings of this particular report are also on the Cool Infrastructures Project website. And this was a project that spanned not only South Asia, but also Africa and Southeast Asia. So for Karachi alone, this was a telephonic survey. We were trying to understand the relationship between heat and COVID-19, and it covered 1,172 respondents, all coming from low-income backgrounds. And 63% reported receiving 12 or fewer hours of electricity per day. 8% reported having electricity for 21 hours or more. A very small number of respondents relying only on solar panels. And all of these responses then we correlated to the kind of vulnerability and exposure to heat as it becomes a function of building type, time spent in home, access to electricity, access to water, access to ventilation also. And then we broke it up in teams in terms of how people were responding to different kinds of stress levels to heat, from feeling hot to confusion to headache to fatigue to poor quality of sleep to dizziness to nausea. And there are different ways of categorizing reactions or responses to heat stress. Next slide, please. So we've gone on to actually do a very large survey of heat perceptions and risk mitigation strategies in Karachi. And this is a survey we completed in 2022. We're still cleaning up the data, and the data will come out soon and it will be made public. So we conducted commercial surveys of our threshold was 5,000. We succeeded in collecting 4,217 commercial surveys, largely informal workers. And we carried out 13,370 household surveys. Next slide, please. And this was across the city of Karachi. So we went into virtually every district and we looked at a plethora, next slide, please, a plethora of different kinds of building materials as these were associated with different parts of the city. So we went, for instance, into rural Karachi, into areas like Samugot, District Malir, where people largely reside in adobe and bamboo housing. Next slide, please. Then coming into the central parts of the city, such as Musa Colony and of course Niazi Colony in District Central, where we find dense street morphology, older settlements, incremental construction materials. And next slide, please. And then getting into the peri-urban zones, like the Halkani district, which is called the urbanizing periphery, where we now increasingly find larger plots of land, one floor only, no, not ground plus one, as we see in the inner parts of the city, rapid construction, larger open spaces. Next slide, please. And then we sort of looked at, in these surveys, we looked at what kinds of cooling practices involved, especially water. So this is something that, we don't often consider. Water is thought about in terms of hygiene, in terms of its importance to food, but it hasn't really been thought about in terms of its critical importance to cooling practices. So one of the questions we posed was that in implementing heat risk management strategies, what kinds of cooling practices do people deploy? And we found that water was a very, very critical substance in terms of providing deliberate and incidental relief to poor, lower income and marginalized populations who often depend on critical infrastructures, and water especially playing a key role in these practices in the forms of taking a cool shower, using water to wet cement floors in order to cool them, wetting clothes, and standing, sitting or sleeping in front of a pedestal fan for evaporative cooling, washing one's face and hands with refrigerated tap water, increased use of ice to cool beverages for consumption. And the ice factor is really interesting because it's increasingly becoming harder and harder to find ice in a city like Karachi. Water then is an increasingly important substance also for laundry, given the increased number of wardrobe changes due to sweating. Next slide, please. And then we connected all of this in terms of gender differences to heat risk mitigation, looking at choice of dietary preferences dictated by heat, and then women's daily cycles of cooking affected by the outdoor temperature, choosing to cook after sunset, avoiding long hours in the kitchens during hot afternoon, and women especially at a disadvantage due to prolonged confinement in poorly ventilated and often hotter indoor environments with limited access to cooling spaces outside the home. Next slide, please. So I know I'm running out of time, but very quickly. So in the part of this big survey, one of the questions that we asked was, and this is coming out of the Karachi Heat Wave Management Plan, which sets out to give these warnings, alerts just before a heat wave is about to come. So we asked both in the occupational and the household surveys that do people get these warnings? And interestingly, 50% of those respondents in a household survey said that they've never received any kind of heat wave alert. And out of the auto workers, 53% said that they'd never received any kind of heat wave alert. So we found this to be quite interesting, despite the fact that the PMT has been quite so hands-on in saying that we bring out these big heat wave alerts. They come on telephones, on media, this, that, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a bit of a dissonance factor that we found here. Next slide, please. So this brings me to the final part of my presentation here, which is how do we create resilient pathways for extremely hot climates in Southern Asia? And I'm just leveraging here a very interesting article that came out by Sajid Mahmood in Applied Energy. Next slide, please. He was actually a PhD student finishing up his PhD at Edinburgh University. And he was looking at the ASHRAE standards criteria that are used to characterize climate zones and calculate a building's cooling needs and discomfort hours. And he focused specifically on Pakistan. And the takeaway from the article is essentially, he did a simulated scenario, and it shows how Pakistan's extremely hot, dry climate, the focus is largely southern Pakistan, may increase from 36.9 to 78% by 2080, which means that indoor discomfort hours will range, will really go up substantially. Next slide, please. And finally, this next slide, please. Let's jump on from this also. So this brings me to the final point, which was about cooling resiliency and adaptation, SDG 7, reliable, affordable, sustainable energy, which in my personal opinion forms the heart of the crux of all these SDGs. And whatever these SDGs are going to be going as we go forward in revamping them and reinventing them. And I think a very important aspect of this is how we must scale up urban knowledge to inform in a socially and thermally just way policy and planning agendas for a better urban future. Thank you very much. I'll stop right there. And thank you so much, Nelly, for sharing these slides.
Thank you so much, Nosheen. This was fantastic. There's so many takeaways, so much food for thought. But let me just give you 3 thoughts from just reacting to your presentation. The first thing I take away is the importance of data, and that you've rightly highlighted. And the fact is that collecting data is becoming more and more easy and cheaper and ubiquitous. I mean, I was in a meeting with the Secretary of Rural Development in India, and I was mentioning that they have this housing program, affordable housing program, where they build about 20 million houses. And not once have they thought about thermal comfort in that, and many of these houses are going to be death traps, frankly, the way they're built. Whereas you could put, a $1 sensor, and you could start tracking the temperature in these houses, and make that one of the KPIs instead of just volume. So that could be one of the things. And the other takeaway is the importance of forecasting and what they call hyper-local forecasting, which you correctly pointed out, that we'll need neighborhood level temperature data, for example, to kind of react. And the third thing I would say is that you mentioned the heat action plan that Karachi has, and Ahmedabad you mentioned as one of the first ones. My criticism of Ahmedabad is that it's a very reactive kind of disaster responsive plan. There's nothing proactive or sort of forward planning about it. And frankly, in the situation we have, we need to think about sort of rethink how we design our city, and who is the city for? Is it just for the elite, or do the poor have a place in it? And if they do, we need to start thinking of things like green public spaces as a public good, as a right that we should demand. The government of Singapore, Singapore is not a good example for South Asian cities, but they have this target that every person in Singapore, I think in the next 10 years, should be living 10 minutes away from a green public space. That's a great objective. Why can't we have that for our South Asian cities? And I don't think it's that difficult. So let me stop here, and then we can go have a further discussion later on. But let me turn to our next speaker. So Nosheen is from the academic / practitioner side, and now we're going to have somebody from the public policy side. So we're very honored to have Bushra Afreen, who's the Chief Heat Officer of Dhaka. And I think probably the first such person to hold this position in South Asia, for sure. So Bushra, welcome, and we're very glad to have you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abbas. I'm very, I think I will share from my own slides, if that's okay.
Sure,
so
yeah.
Because I just updated it a little bit. It was really nice to hear your words, and as well as Professor Nosheen's words. I wish I had the opportunity to meet you, Dr. Nosheen, because I feel like we really need somebody like you here in Dhaka. Heat knowledge is very limited. When I came into this position, I found that there was absolutely no education around it in a public at a public level, and I'm happy to say that because of Arshra creating this position, facilitating it within Dhaka, a lot of people are now more aware of it at a public level, but we still have so much work to do. just scratched a tiny bit of the surface. So I don't have such an eloquent presentation like yours, but I do have something that I would like to show you. This is an overview of our heat awareness campaign that we are going to launch around the from mid-May. That is a bit late. However, things always take a bit of time in countries like ours. And you know, with the infrastructure that we're working with, that I'm working with at a city level, it's been incredibly challenging at a personal and a professional level to get things going. There's a lot of bureaucratic systems that we have to overcome, and also I'm learning every day. So yeah, without further ado, I'll just begin. And just begin. Okay. So I have three main components. Can everybody see? Is it all?
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
So I have three main components. So we have early warning systems, water accessibility, and awareness systems with volunteer networks. And I'll just go into it. So the first thing that we're focusing on that we didn't have before is that we want to formalize a very strategic, oh, I spelled that wrong, a very strategic partnership with Bangladesh Meteorological Division. So think strategic, sorry. So this is going to, what this is going to do is enable the city to really integrate that forecasting data, which it didn't before, but really integrate it throughout all city levels, as well as incorporating a heat health feature into the city app, which is currently under, it's in the process of being upgraded. So it's going to roll out an upgrade, and within it, we are going to have a heat health feature. So if, for example, which will ask users for certain data, like do you have a medical condition? Are you female? Do you have a young child? Do you have elderly parents? Is anyone in your family mentally, you know, suffering from mental disabilities? You know, questions that will increase their vulnerability to heat and will give them messages accordingly. So this, because we don't have health data, so our health data is all in silos. Nobody wants to give us health data. City doesn't have access to health data. Even during the dengue pandemic and COVID pandemic, we really struggled with getting it. Heat is not even a national priority at the moment. So it's really hard to mandate that hospitals share their data with the city. So we're going at it the other way. We're going to ask users, and we're going to ask our partners, like there's a lot of city services that have a lot of users, like cash apps, cash transfer apps. So we are going to advertise this heat health feature within those, within these other applications, so that people, even low-income users, will be able to connect with this heat health feature, and they will be warned appropriately using the forecasting data that we are going to get with BMD. I know that's a bit complex, and I don't know if I explained that well, but I'm really looking forward to it, because it's a very new initiative for the city to try to engage at such an individual level, and you know, really work with city people. And you know, they will be, for example, they will be able to point out hotspots that where there's no shade, where there's no place to get access to water and stuff like that. They can point that out in the map that is within the app. There is also an opportunity to with the existing collaboration with the BMD to add in, to integrate health data if we do get it in the future, and also to like contextualize it, because we don't have local mortality data. For example, we don't know how many people have died in the last year, which was the hottest year on record. We don't have any visibility on that. So we would really like to be able to combine these, you know, future editions, and you know, while leaving room for you know, heat wave classification and heat wave naming. We have all, like, Bangladesh is excellent, and it's an example. It's an exemplary country for cyclone preparation. Not one person has died from cyclones or flooding in the recent years, and even if they've done, even if they have passed, the number is very little compared to heat waves, which have caused so many people to be admitted to the hospital, to die. But we don't know how to diagnose it that well yet. Doctors are still reluctant to do that. So we really need to go, as we think about the future, we really need to think about it in that way, so that heat waves are treated like a disaster. Heat waves are considered to be a public health crisis. And that is what I'm advocating for every single day. Also, we are going to use this forecasting data to coordinate the city's effort, Dhaka North City Corporation's efforts, as well as other volunteer networks on the field. So, for example, we are already building up a ward-level database on who are the volunteer networks and groups and community groups and NGO networks that are strong, in which areas are they strong in, and how do we leverage their positions in their communities to not only prepare people at an individual level or a community level, but also, like, during heat waves, how are they going to check in on the vulnerable people within those communities? Because even within very low income communities, there are people who are, there's a diverse range of income inequalities within those communities as well. And so there are still people, elderly people, that I have seen living in tin sheds without access to power or electricity or water. And these are the most these are people living in such poverty that you can't even imagine it without without being in their shoes. It's just impossible to do. So how do you connect volunteers to people living in such circumstances? So these are things that we're working on, that we are strategizing currently within our volunteer networks, that I will get to just in a second. The other thing that we are trying to look at is water. So Dhaka is a very thirsty city. There was a report last year done by our main national newspaper that people don't drink enough water in the city. Whether that's because that there's no culture for it, like, for example, when I've traveled abroad, I see everybody carrying water bottles. When I studied abroad, I myself got into a habit of carrying water bottles around. But when I came back, I was the only person carrying a water bottle around, and it was really a struggle to fill it up unless I was in somebody's house or in my office. I couldn't just ask a shopkeeper, because they don't, or a barista at a coffee shop, or anybody to fill up my water bottle like I would have done if I was abroad. There were no public water fountains. Nothing like that. So if I want to get water outside when I'm on the streets, I would have to either buy it, which would cost me at least 20 taka, or I would have to find a drinkable water ATM booth where I could then pay somebody with very it's subsidized. So even if it's low cost, it's again, it's not everywhere, right? So what we want to do is increase water accessibility, introduce a culture of public water, whether it's free through water fountains, or whether it's just a tap. So we are also cognizant of the fact that the Western module for water fountains wouldn't really apply here, because there's a hygiene component. So we people here are familiar with deep tube wells or taps. So we are trying to figure out what would work in our context, and how can we make sure that they're safe and secure and inexpensive, because we do have a culture of theft. So we are working all of that out, as well as how to prevent people from misusing it. Because even though a water filtration system would ensure that the water drip is very slow, people are very creative in the city, and at times of desperation, they have been known to misuse. And from a city perspective, the city is very reluctant to engage in these initiatives because of that misuse. So we are trying to marry those. We are trying to encourage. I am trying to encourage the city to figure out solutions that would be a compromise, as well as work for public welfare. Currently, we have some water stations and public restrooms across several parks, but that is not enough. We need more. We need to assess water demand, and that is something that WaterAid is doing right now. We are currently in the process of collaborating with them. So we want to figure out, okay, how much water do we need if we want to have accessibility stations across all bus terminals, across all bus stops. So, and also create a culture where before the city, so the city, it's challenging because right when I was in the process of becoming chief heat officer, the city finalized the bus stop renovation. So they did it without, so they installed shades. So all the bus stops now have shades. However, they don't have restrooms, they don't have water filling stations. So when I asked them why, they said that they didn't think of it. So it's introducing a culture where the city does think about public health, does think about, introducing recycling bins and all of these things that will make the city more livable and inclusive. It's going to be a long process, but I'm confident that we will get there. And then lastly, we have I'm so sorry for coughing. The weather is so bad right now. We're currently in the middle of a heat wave, and I'm sitting in air conditioning. I'm grateful that I'm sitting in air conditioning, but the second it's off, we all get drenched in a matter of minutes. We just started April, and it's already extremely hot. So that's why I have a cough right now, because of the changing temperatures. Anyway, we have awareness systems and volunteer networks where we are using pre-prepared materials to give us an idea or a guide to creating our own materials, through which we will prepare a booklet which will have very accessible, easily understood materials. It will not be text heavy. Most of the diagrams will be visual. And our hope with this is that anybody who reads it, anybody, even if they don't know how to read, they can understand from the diagrams there that what is extreme heat? Because we don't know that yet. We've grown up in a hot and humid country. So many people think that my job is a bogus job, because what is there to be scared about heat? How do you decrease heat? Like, what is there to be done about heat? We're used to it. We're tough. We are resilient already. It's in our blood. But that is not true. This type of heat has never been here before in Bangladesh, and especially in Dhaka, temperatures are 2 degrees higher, and that's a huge difference. So especially among vulnerable people, it is, and heat is not even a priority because they have other problems to think about, like whether their gas will be on, whether there's water, whether there's electricity. In fact, during last year's heat wave, some communities didn't have power for 15 hours. And this was a huge burden on women who spent nights and nights not sleeping and not resting and getting no respite from heat, because they had to cool down their husbands and their children and then go to work the next day. And this was a pattern that kept on repeating, not to mention the increase in domestic violence during heat season, because men in our country aren't usually taught to regulate their emotions when they're stressed out. So the women became kind of like a punching bag, where an outlet to release that stress. So it was not a good time to be a woman in vulnerable areas during heat season. One of my main goals with the volunteer networks and with the guide as well, the booklet, is to enable people to acknowledge that heat stress is a real thing, and there are effects of it on your mental health and on your physical health, and what to do about it, how to access solutions and resources, and how to get help, and how to help others and yourself and your loved ones. So we are testing it out with focus groups, and once it's ready, we can even share it with you. We are also collaborating with UNICEF on this, and the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society, as well as the IFRC. And once it's fully ready, we will also have it validated by our national health departments. And regarding the volunteer network, so this is a huge network because we have so many civil society groups, youth groups that all want to do something. We have Bangladesh is average population. The average age of a person here is, I think, below 30. So we have a very, very interesting situation where we have a lot of like pent-up energy from at a youth level where they want to be involved, they want to be mobilized, and then when they're not being able to do that, when they're not, they are, going in another direction, which is detrimental to their health and to society. So we want to bring in, you want to mobilize the youth, mobilize students, mobilize all these groups that are working at a grassroots level already and strong within their networks and communities to talk about heat, to create chaos about heat, and tell people that it is not a hopeless situation. It is not just another burden that we are adding to your already full plate, but there are ways that you can protect yourself. There are solutions you can seek out. There are things that the city is doing for you, where we want to help each other out. We are creating, for example, and I'll get to that at the end, but we're piloting some cooling shelters and cooling centers and cool spaces, because space is an issue in Dhaka. So we're testing that out and seeing if it's actually usable, seeing if it's actually friendly for women. Like we're painting some pink to make sure that women know that it's for them. And it's very hard when you think about it, because things like this have not been done in Dhaka ever before. But we have to start somewhere, and if we keep, my biggest challenge so far has been bureaucratic systems. So that is why public-private partnerships are so important. So that's why we are trying to bring in these other groups and other members, so that we can do something together. So some of the other, and I didn't talk about the Heat Action Week. So we want to highlight all of our initiatives and all of our work and all of these solutions that we're doing through a very intensive week called Heat Action Week. Actually, the name has not been finalized yet, but it's launching on a Saturday, which is a weekend, on May 18th. And the mayor will be there, and we will probably, I think the venue has not been settled yet, but we're doing it in a park where everybody will be welcome, and we will have posters or digital billboards available throughout the city where we will talk about heat and how to protect yourself from it, and how to identify whom in your family, who is the person in your family who is more vulnerable than you are when it comes to heat stress, and how to protect them. What are the resources that are available to you? And also, what are the other things that we're looking into? For example, we have so many sensors that are put up. Compared with last year, we had one sensor that the city didn't even own. That was, we had two, but I don't count the other one. That one was at the U.S. Embassy, and now we have one and then we had the other one, which was the BMD's weather station, and that was it. So in a city like Dhaka, that was so dynamic, that varies from place to place, with extremely congested areas and affluent areas with green spaces, with inequal tree equity, you can't just have one sensor or one weather station. You do need more. So we now have over 10 of them, and we are lots of different groups are installing more. So we are hoping to integrate all of these sensors into one map, so that we can really see where the hotspots are ourselves, and take specific action. And the city is hugely investing in urban forests. We have formalized the step-by-step bureaucratic process and how an urban forest can be planted, how it can be funded. So I think this was a great success on our part. In a city like Dhaka, where land is so limited, it was an unbelievable stroke of luck to be able to work on these. And even though one has not been finalized yet, we are trying to get written confirmation from the Ministry of Roads and Highways to let us use the land formally, not verbally, but formally write it down that we can use it. And they're very reluctant to do that. But the other forest is almost, we're ready to plant because that is on DNCC land. So the city is funding it completely. We are trying to mobilize CSR funding from commercial banks and working with the central bank to do it for the other one that is on Ministry of Roads land. But it'll all come together once the paperwork is through. And then we are also piloting a cool zone, the one that I mentioned with the pink walls. We are making sure that it's vegetated, it has shade, it has a fan, it has a water booth, it has access to a bathroom, a clean one that will be maintained. and it's a no smoke-free zone. So the culture that has been going on in Dhaka is that any shade that is available in the city is usually taken up by men who then smoke, and it makes it very, because we are in a conservative society, women don't want to take up space or don't want to be conspicuous. So you'll see women on the street, but they're always moving. But the men are stationary, or they have a choice to be stationary and they have a choice to rest, whereas women don't. So I'm trying to create those spaces for them. We already have a space that was beautifully done next to a school that has a mural as well, and we are currently trying to figure out how to create a bathroom there, how to make sure there's a drinking water booth there. So we are also looking at existing infrastructures that will help support this cooling zone initiative. And in informal settlements, we already planted over 5,000 trees last year. And this year, we are trying to do more and have a better maintenance schemes in place, like create more green jobs from community members instead of going, instead of third-party caretakers. So that's also being done this year. And we also want to encourage people to rethink about how they design their metal roofing. There's somebody from the University of Berkeley who's working with me. Her name is Laura. She's fantastic. She's working with a small number of communities to see whether they would be open to cutting like a square hole on the rooftop and propping it open with a flap that is water resistant. So during times of rain or storms, it will not just blow open. It will be securely fastened. But during heat season, it can be propped open to let hot air escape. These are building structures that are made either entirely of tin or combined, like hybrid tin and brick, and they don't have any windows. Or they have windows, but they don't really do anything because hot air rises and there's no escape in that tin shed, right? It's just an oven. So we want to see if we can start, the culture of roof cutting to ensure that the hot air is able to rise and get them some relief. There are other initiatives as well, like Brack School of Health is doing has already piloted I think 100 houses of rooftop painting. So we're trying to collaborate with them and see if we can expand on that and see the results from that as well. Whether that made any difference, and also do a rooftop installation program where some community members.
Bushra, sorry
Yes.
to interrupt, but could you wrap up now, because we have one more speaker and we want to leave some time for discussion.
Yeah, I'm so sorry I lost track of time, but yeah, overall there are some cool, pun intended, initiatives being launched and already being done, and I'm just very excited about integrating the World Bank's policy brief as well and see where that leads us. And I hope this was a useful array of information that I presented. I'm sorry it wasn't as fancy as I would have liked it to be, but yeah, that is where we're at right now. A lot of work is being done and a lot of work still needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it was extremely useful. And I think I was struck by so many commonalities between what you presented, Bushra, and what Nausheen. For example, the centrality of water, like both of you mentioned that, centrality of data. And I'm more and more convinced that we really need to invest more in hydromet systems, early warning systems, data. You said that, like there are 10 sensors, you probably need hundreds, if not thousands. So, those are the things we need to invest in. So let's move to our third and final speaker, who's Bijal Brahmbhatt. She's from the Mahila Housing Trust. And if you haven't heard of this, I really strongly urge you to go and look at their work. The absolutely inspiring work in Ahmedabad. This was set up in 1994 by Seva, which is, Seva is this women's group, which has about 2.5 million members. And the Mahila Housing Trust has done some really fantastic, innovative work on with the poor related to heat. So, Nausheen mentioned the Ahmedabad Heat Action Plan. As soon as that action plan came out, the Mahila Housing Trust immediately started identifying the gaps vis-a-vis the poor. And they have done things like modular roofs, white roofs, cool roofs for slums. So really fantastic work. So Bijal, over to you, and then we'll take some time for questions.
Yeah.
So I'll just share my presentation, but I'll also skip some slides because everything may not be relevant to the current topic. Yeah, just a minute. Yeah, so meanwhile, as I share, we began in, as you said, in 1994, and we really started working on climate change because we were actually set up to start working on habitats, meaning housing, access to water, sanitation services. And then we realized that, in urban areas, climate change, was sort of the negative impact of climate change was getting multiplied, enhanced because of the kind of built environment that the women had. So I'm not going through these in great details, but the gender, because we work with poor women in informal sector, there is this added dual care burden. And I just want to give one example which actually struck me, not of heat, but of flooding actually. But this is how it get, enhanced with women. In some areas in the state of Bihar in India, actually regularly get flooded because of people climb on top of their houses to ensure that they don't get affected by the floods. The women come down first because they have to clean all the muck that has entered the house, and then their death rate increases because there are increased snake bites, while the men are still at top. So I think it's always one doesn't need to prove anything, but that's how women are actually much more impacted. So we started working on 4 stresses across also Bangladesh and Nepal, but largely on heat, water scarcity, flooding, and vector-borne diseases, which are going to, impact India and South Asia very adversely due to climate change. And our first experience when we started talking to the women was that while they did say that, yeah, heat is increasing or probably it's raining at all sorts of timing, their reaction was that it was God's act. So they did not understand what climate change was. Also because heat and water scarcity probably are such stresses that are long term and abstract. So but potent disasters. So, whatever is abstract really actually, the educated and trained people are also finding it difficult to act upon. So the first thing that we had to do was actually come up with very, very strong gamification and, communication material to be able to help them understand their vulnerabilities. So for example, a snake and ladder game, and also tell them that it's not merely God's act, which actually showed them, so they started getting interested in climate. So the first game was understanding what climate change is and how its impact are going to happen. Game, videos, and other stuff. This is just what I'm displaying. Then we started, analyzing their vulnerabilities. So there would be things like, Moser framework, which is actually made up for gender, but we adapted it for, climate change. Powerful exercises like histograms. So we made them, think what has changed over the years. So what was it like 10 years back, 5 years, and now? And then basically rate their vulnerabilities. So that you are able to identify. So somewhere heat would be higher, at other places probably flooding. But heat, flooding were the two main, issues. Water scarcity, not so much so, but apparently as science tells us, we understand that it's going to hit all our countries very badly, and it's going to get exaggerated because of climate change. We really then had to teach them systems thinking because climate change is all about addressing the system. And if you don't, then, making only one intervention doesn't really help. So this is typically a water cycle. We did it for water. We are also doing it for heat now. And what we did was we mapped, and there would be various things like, evaporation, runoff, ground water absorption, and then So all these elements which are affecting the water cycle were mapped, and you see this yellow and pink chits, and they were put on a rope, and then the women actually pulled those nodes. And when the rope shook, they understood that, the entire, all these elements will have to be worked upon. So it was not merely something which was affecting them at household level, but also from household level to community level, and that they will have to also start working at city level if they were to do something about the stresses that were impacting them. So basically trying to teach the systems thinking approach. Also, I'm not going into this detail, but we also try and teach them the science. And this one is on water quality, because water quality is greatly impacted as water becomes scarce. But I'll move to the heat one. I'll show you the approach. Yeah, so this is a picture where, we are piloting a cool roof technology. Next to it is like a AC or a tin sheet, which is usually prevalent across South India. Dhaka is a hub. And then we, put in data loggers there. And the women take the temperature themselves. And then we teach them to compare it with the IMD. And then they realize that, the technology is working. So they then, start investing in these technologies. But more importantly, now this is one of the technologies. We tried several. We tried cool roof paint. We tried a bamboo roof. What was more important to me is that, this particular blue technology that you see had corrugations like this AC or tin sheet here. And the women, when they had to take a loan to buy it, clearly told the technologists that, we need the corrugations removed because we want to climb on top and make it flat so that we can use it like a terrace to sleep upon. And when that was done by the technologists, they, started taking loans. So overall, our approach became that, we sort of explain to them what climate change is, build their capacities. Then we, sort of pilot technologies, whatever stress it is. Then we give feedback to the technologies. And then, we bring out financial products so that they can buy it. And then, of course, we work with policymakers, and the women are encouraged to come out of their homes and also take city level action. So, for example, Ahmedabad Heat Action Plan is, something where the heat action plan was actually started way back, but because it was driven by a public health institute, all it did was it gave early warning systems, and it also, ensured hospital readiness for people who were admitted due to heat-related ailments. Beyond that, it was not looking. And for the first time, our women said that we are very hot inside the house or outside the house, and you should start working on issues like cool roofs. So when we intervened, the municipal corporation has now taken up cool roofs as a part of their heat action plan. Our labor department has also declared that outdoor workers, be given exemption from working in the afternoon. Of course, it has not got implemented because, livelihood is really crucial and the private sector won't listen, but there are advisories issued. Now, here is one photo of another city called Jodhpur in Rajasthan in India, which is a desert province and therefore extremely hot. And what happens actually for cities is that, while there are heat warning systems issued, they go to the district level, and the city governance in India is separate from the district collectorate. And therefore, the city CEOs don't really take up those heat advisories and issue early warning systems. So our women actually demanded that in the city of Jodhpur. The Jodhpur city has now, so we are developing a heat action plan, which is collecting data based on vulnerability. You cannot look at exposure data only because these women have to go out and work, right? So, you have to get exposed whether it's heat or no heat. So, vulnerability based data collection. And then, these women have now started getting early warnings. And 40% of the households that we work with don't own mobiles. and the mobiles that are owned are largely in the hand of males. So we have to go with dual systems, like the women themselves writing down the temperature every day in their settlements. By that, two things are achieved. One is that people get to know about the temperature, and also that women become more and more conscious because they get involved in the action. They understand how to look at IMD. They are also leading other actions like painting cool on traffic booths and other vulnerable populations in the city of Jodhpur. Now, this is just one ongoing cooling center. It's not complete yet. It's going to have rooftop ventilation and sprinklers all around, which is going to be put up in the informal area of Jodhpur city. They have also started looking at blue gling networks, plantations, etc. So these women have then now started taking lead at the city level. And so far as technologies of heat are concerned, we've understood that women will invest into what is accessible, aspirational, user friendly, and affordable. So it's not only affordability they are looking at, but they are looking at aspirationality too. They are also looking at accessibility from the market. So, and we were promoting startup technologies to test it out. But one of the issues with startup is that they may close down shop, and then we are left stranded with the women. So this is how we have been experimenting. And very recently, by April 15th, we are also going to launch a heat insurance for informal women workers. We'll be covering income losses and also, sort of any expenses that they, need to incur because of heat. That's how we have been trying to work with these poor women. So yeah, I'll stop the sharing. I hope I was fast enough. Yeah.
Fantastic. This is really such interesting initiatives that we can all learn from, Bijal. So thank you very much. So we are already about 7 minutes over our scheduled closing, but I think we can take about 10 more minutes if that's okay with our speakers to take some questions. So let's open the floor for any questions. You can just unmute yourself and ask a question or put it in the chat. And while we are waiting for the first question, maybe I can ask the first question to all three speakers and in any order, which is that let's say we could wave a magic wand and make you the emperor of South Asia, empress actually of South Asia, and you could do anything that you wanted. What would be your top 1 or 2 priorities? Like what you want to do that you think is the absolute top priority for you? Maybe Nausheen, why don't you go first?
Thank you, Abbas. My gosh, that's such a loaded question. Would I want to be Empress of South Asia? So I think if I could be sort of bring it down to a slightly more humble level and say if I could be mayor for a day, and in a city like Karachi, what would I want? I guess I would like to have all architects, engineers, urban planners, medical doctors, physiologists, epidemiologists come and sit at the same table and have a really, really profound conversation on what do we mean when we say a possibility for a new urban future in light of the kind of global warming trends we are seeing. And in the course of that conversation, position gender right at the heart. That is my ideal. That is my ideal in waving that magic wand. Thank you.
That is a great suggestion. Absolutely agree. Bushra? Sorry, you're mute.
I was saying that although that sounds fantastic, what Dr. Nausheen said, for us that would look like the room full of architects and everyone just competing and having this like, no, I'll get to do it, no, I'll get to do it, because we've tried that and it didn't work. And so what I guess for me, what I would like to do is for people to be able to put their self-interest aside. And Dhaka is so highly competitive. Everybody just wants to be on top and everybody wants to have power. And sometimes that is at a cost to public welfare and public. So if it was me and I was the empress, I would make governance more governance and collaboration more meaningful and fruitful. If because right now our city, I don't know what it is like for Karachi, but Dhaka North doesn't have it doesn't control electricity, doesn't control water system, doesn't control, like it feels very debilitating to work in a local city where I don't have I'm not able to where the mayor doesn't have the power over most things. And our budget is completely governed by the Ministry of Local Government. So, I would try to wave my wand and make the city more capable, institutionally, infrastructurally, budget-wise. It should be independent. It should be able to respond to its own needs instead of waiting for 10 years for like permission for something. If it wants to grow an office, if it wants to grow a department, being chief aid officer means nothing if you don't have the team to support their work. So I think I would do that. I would increase capacity. Over the first thing I would do is increase capacity and fill an office with people who are actually dedicated and passionate and want to work for public welfare. Instead of just doing their job or just people who understand and empathize and believe in the work that they're doing.
Completely agree. And in fact, that's one of the unfortunate remnants of British colonialism, I think, because I was reading today that China, I read something startling today, which is that in China, 50% of government expenditure is done at the local government level, 50%, 50. And in India, do you know what that number is? 7%. And I'm sure Bangladesh and Pakistan are the same. So, this, a lot of the expenditure and the functions are centralized at the state government or at the
I'm so sorry, but
national level.
if I may just add something, it's not even just that. It's that our officials keep changing. So our officials get sent to the ministry, and then once you have an energy synergy with like a chief engineer of the city, perhaps, and then he gets transferred, or they only send the ones who are about to retire. So the mayor spends time and energy into facilitating, like keeping him updated, and then he's gone, and you have to start over. And so something that you've been working on for 4 years, you have to do it all over again because maybe the new chief health officer doesn't believe in this work. Maybe he's asking all these questions which you've already answered, and he sent back the file all the way down below, and now you have to do the file all over again. And it's just
it is.
Yeah.
Bijat, what is your number one wish? Sorry, you're mute.
I have two. First one is that where invited spaces are created where poor, especially women, can sit with the government and private sector and influence policies and governance and budget. And the second one is that I really wish, the educated mind talks so much data. I'm sorry. But all the time I keep hearing is data. Now, what is actually happening in Indian cities? That lot of plans and data and macro level data keeps floating around, but no money for action. So it's real action is difficult. Yeah, it's complex, and that's why not many people would take it up. So I wish more money would come towards action, as it is coming towards data.
Fully agree. All three excellent suggestions. So we have one question. Devika, go ahead.
Thanks, Abbas. So, firstly, Bushra, Bijal, and Noshin, thank you for your excellent presentations. I really enjoyed the session. My name is Devika. I work on heat stress and sustainable cooling in India. And, this is not a very pointed question that I have, but, specifically to Bushra, it's very inspiring to see how you're implementing the work on as a heat officer at the urban level. And throughout our work we've been analyzing these heat action plans, and in India there are many of them, but nothing as comprehensive as what Dhaka is doing. And I think there is a lot of potential for knowledge sharing and collaboration between all the South Asian countries moving forward, and that's one of the areas that we want to work on as well. And going forward, I think there is a lot of scope for us to engage further and develop on this. And especially I like the idea on heat action week that you have. Maybe we can engage on this and have a separate discussion. And would you be willing to collaborate with any Indian cities or even at the central level on something like this?
Yes, absolutely. I think we should have that offline discussion. It would be great to set up this partnership of cities across South Asia. There's so much we can learn from each other and so many interesting things.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Sorry, Devika, your audio came a little delayed, so I received. I think I've always said that there needs to be more chief heat officers across South Asia, Southeast Asia. We need temperature soaring in Philippines, for temp soaring in Thailand, across India, and we need more people with this. We need more women in these positions. It feels really lonely to be the only chief heat officer in Asia, but I know that that's not true. Like Bijalapa is probably, she's a chief heat officer in her own right. Noshinapa, she's also, you guys are all chief heat officers, in my opinion, only that the city, I feel that the infrastructure doesn't support that yet. But I really, I would hope that, we can form a network of very strong women who are committed to heat resilience and, who can learn from each other. There's so much that I learned from these presentations that I didn't know that it could look like that. For example, the cooling centers that Vijalapa talked about. I took a screenshot of her slide because it looked so cool. And, I really, I would hope that this is something that I can share with my team. And it's just, we really need to work together, and we really need to share the things that we are doing in our own local areas, because again, we are Asian, we are South Asian, or we're Southeast Asian. We have commonalities. We have, like British colonial, whether it's British colonialism or political bureaucracies, that we have things in common that, I don't share with cities, like with other chief heat officers like Miami or LA. I believe that if we had a strong network, if we can create a strong network out of this, if we can keep in touch, that would be so good. I would love that.
Fantastic. Noshin, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Busha. That's very inspiring. I just want to just make one point that yes, absolutely, there should be a network of South Asian cities to raise the bar on different kinds of things relating to extreme heat. But I think at a very fundamental level, no one is taking heat seriously at the national or even at the local level in South Asia. And I'm very emboldened to know that that in Bangladesh we have a chief heat officer for a city like Dhaka. But at a more fundamental level, I think it's just well, heat. South Asia has always had heat. What's the big deal? I see that to be more of the, garmi hai to hamesha se garmi thi, as we say in Hindi Urdu. That is the general consensus. But I know that people on ground, whether they say that extreme heat is related to a punishment from a divine being or whatever, people are beginning to feel a change in the weather, if not the climate, so to speak. And things are becoming, whether it's related to water, to electricity, the level of intensity is becoming very palpable. And of course, this also is differentiated and pivots on the geographical factor of each and every city, whether you go from a coastal city like Karachi or Mumbai, or travel inwards to a city in Sindh like Jacobabad, and an entire belt that has always been hot but is now getting hotter. So what do we mean by these intense levels of what is hotter? And these metrics are very misleading. They're really not telling us what being hot feels like. And so this is the part that actually fundamentally really frustrates me and scares me a little bit also, that heat is not being taken seriously in South Asia. Thank you.
It's so yeah, go ahead.
To Noshin's point, I just want to add, I absolutely agree. And it was so disheartening when I talked to the Ministry of Disaster Management, and they said that, it will eventually be taken seriously when enough people die, like cyclones, like floods, and that was, to me, that was, I couldn't believe I just heard that. Of course, he didn't use the exact words, but that's what he implied. And there are no women also in this ministry, like and that is another problem that we are facing. I believe that if we had more women in power, who, we could really, as in these crucial roles where climate change and heat islands disproportionately affect women, but we don't have enough women as decision makers at, even though our prime minister is a woman, a lot of her cabinet members are, men. And I believe that they don't understand the heat the way that we do. They're not aware of the way heat affects women the way we are aware. And it's really difficult to bring them, to convince them, because they are trying to follow a certain protocol. They're trying to, this is how the status quo has been. This is how long it takes for things to change. And this is how it will always be. But, the fact that we have an urgency that we need to work on, I'm still trying to communicate that. I'm still trying to make heat, and the government has flat out told me that some people have told me that, the government will not classify heat as an urgent, as an extreme threat, because there's other political connotations involved. But unless it does that, we cannot activate disaster communities or disaster committees or, relief efforts that exist within the government structure, but we can't activate it because, again, there's no national mandate that says that heat is an emergency, so it's really challenging and almost demoralizing at times. And there's another question from Drishya. Do you want me to answer it, or?
Yes, please go ahead.
If I could just ask, the idea of ecological restoration, what exactly do you mean by that? Do you mean by biodiversity? Do you mean soil? It's because if so, yes, it's not just primarily focused on adapting to growing heat. It's also air pollution, but a big chunk of it is biodiversity and replenishing the soil with all the nutrients that it has lost over the years. We are following a Miyawaki method. I know that they have been done in India. In some cities they worked, some they didn't, but we have no other choice because traditional tree planting is getting us nowhere in Dhaka. So we have identified a few locations, 2 locations, honestly. We did identify 3, but on the 3rd location, after everything was done, we found out that there were electrical lines running through the place, the site, and the city had no idea because, again, the city is not in charge of electrics. So then when, it was a long process of asking the electric, and it didn't work out. But the other 2, we are primarily focused on repairing the soil, enriching it, and planting 170 species of trees across. So these are trees of all types, from shrubs to large canopy trees to fruit trees to flower trees, and it is so diverse, it is so local, and we've even managed to bring in some native trees that we've lost over the years because of deforestation. So we're very excited about it. It's nothing like this has been done before in Dhaka. So even though I am leading it because it is a heat measure, I am a huge lover of trees and nature and all of it. So it is. It does have a huge ecological component to it. There is, and we are trying to connect it to other green spaces nearby, so that small animals and birds, they will be able to, and also for people, they will be able to follow the shade of the trees as they go to work. That is an ambitious project, but I hope it will, we'll get there.
Fantastic. So thank you very much. I think now we'll have to bring it to a close. We've gone about 23 minutes over our time, but I think it was just a fantastic discussion. There's so much that we learned. So I want to thank Nausheen, Bushra. Bijal had to leave, but Bijal also. And like I said, I'm hoping this is the first of a series, and let's continue this dialogue. Let's build up these partnerships so that we can learn from each other. But thank you again. And
thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you,
Take care,
everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.